If you were better, the people around you would be less worse than they are.
Jordan Peterson, a renowned philosopher and psychologist of our time, offers insights into the essence of self-discovery through his enlightening work. His thought-provoking messages inspire us to delve deeper into our inner selves, challenge our long-held beliefs, and foster personal growth. As you immerse yourself in his profound wisdom, bear in mind that this is just the starting point. Embrace the transformative potential that has the ability to change your life in ways that you didn't think was possible. Guided by Peterson's insights towards self-actualization.
And they're coming to see you because they're anxious and depressed, but the reason they're anxious and depressed is because everything they have ignored has popped its head back up and is hell-bent on their destruction.
In a world saturated with distractions, Jordan Peterson's teachings on personal responsibility serve as a stark reminder that it's a crucial foundation for a meaningful life. His work encourages us to seize control of our lives and confront challenges with courage and determination. As you contemplate Peterson's powerful ideas, understand that this is just the beginning. By willingly accepting responsibility for our actions and our choices, we find the fortitude to overcome life's challenges and to unleash our full potential.
Why should you even bother improving yourself? And I think the answer to that is something like, so you don't suffer any more stupidly than you have to.
Jordan Peterson's unwavering emphasis on truth-seeking and honesty has resonated with millions worldwide. His passionate advocacy for the significance of engaging in open and sincere dialogue, even in the face of adversity or discomfort, serves as a powerful reminder. As you explore his teachings, always remember that it's just the beginning. The quest for truth may not always be a smooth process, but it's an indispensable component of personal growth and self-improvement. Allow Peterson's insights to inspire you to question assumptions and seek answers relentlessly, ultimately paving the way for a more genuine and purposeful life.
There's a strong intimation in the Old Testament, which I think, by the way, is completely correct, that if the proper order of being is violated, and that's something like the balance between chaos and order, say, if the proper balance of being is violated, then all hell will break loose. And one of the things I can tell you from reading a very comprehensive set of myths from around the world is that that's a conclusion that human beings have come to everywhere. Stay on the goddamn path and be careful, because if you start to mess around and you deviate, especially if you know that you're deviating, things are not going to go well for you. And that idea is everywhere. And I think it's right. I think the idea is right, because there aren't that many ways of doing things right, and there's a lot of ways of doing things wrong. And if you do things wrong, the consequences of doing them wrong can be truly catastrophic. You know, one of the things I learned from reading Viktor Frankl first, but then Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who I think did a deeper job. These people were very much trying to understand what happened in places like Nazi Germany and in the Soviet Union. And his conclusion, and it's a 2,100 page conclusion, and it's like hammered home with a hammer. It's a book that everyone should read, you know, assuming that you can read a 2,100 page scream, because that's basically what it is. You know, first of all, what he does is document just how terrible things were in the Soviet Union between 1919 and 1959. And no matter how terrible you think they were, unless you know the stories, they were a lot more terrible than that. And they were terrible personally, because everyone lied. They were terrible in families, because 2 out of 5 people were government informers. They were terrible among friends, because no one could tell each other the truth. They were terrible socially, because the whole system was corrupt and ran on slave labor. And they were terrible philosophically, because the doctrine of man upon which the state was founded was hopeless and nihilistic. And they were murderous, destructive, and genocidal. It's like they got it wrong at every single level of analysis simultaneously. And the question is, why? And Solzhenitsyn's answer, and to some degree Viktor Frankl's answer as well, and Václav Havel, and I would say also Nelson Mandela and Gandhi, they all ended up in the same conceptual sphere. And the answer was because individual people lived crooked lives. Because individual people swallowed lies and spoke them and didn't stand up for the truth. And the corruption that spread from each individual pulled the entire state mechanism into that corruption and made everything into hell. You know, there are other theories. Obedience, right? That's kind of the Milgram idea, from that it's easy to make human beings obedient to people in authority. And I've explored that idea quite a bit with regards to what happened, for example, in the Nazi concentration camps. And yes, you can set circumstances up so that people are likely to be obedient to orders that are pathological. There's no doubt about that. And yes, sometimes that's indicative of the weakness of their character, but that's not the issue. And the idea that what happened in Nazi Germany was because a population of good people listened to a tiny minority of bad people, that's really not a good theory. The Nazi ethos was there at every single level of the social organization, right? Right from the personal, right from the familial, all the way up to the leadership. It was the same thing all the way up and all the way down. And the same thing in the Soviet Union. Well, so if you miss the mark, which is apparently what the people of Sodom and Gomorrah did, their sin was grievous, then they risked destruction. And I just cannot see how, after the 20th century, anybody with any sense could possibly not see that as true. And I think that there's a line in the Old Testament, you know, that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And I can tell you one of the things that frightened me badly was the realization from reading Solzhenitsyn and a variety of other things that I was reading at the same time, that Dostoevsky as well, because he makes the same point. He said that a human being is not only responsible for everything they do, but for everything that everyone else does. Now, you know, that's crazy, and he was an epileptic and a mystic, and that's a crazy thing to say. But it's also, there's something about it that's true, because if you were better, the people around you would be less worse than they are. And if you were good enough, you don't know how much better the people around you would be. And so, there's this idea too, you know, that Christ took the sins of the world unto himself. That's a complicated idea, man. I wrestled with that one for a very long time, but I think I figured out, at least in part, what it means. It meant that it's something like the realization of complete humanity. You see, to take the sins of the world unto yourself is to realize that, is to understand the Nazi concentration camp guard. Because that person is human, and so are you. And so if you can't see you in that, then you don't know who you are. And if you can see you in that, well, then you've started to take the sins of the world onto yourself, because you've actually started to take responsibility for those terrible things. You know, I think it's the motif of the motto of the Holocaust Museum in Washington. We must never forget. That's close. And I think you can't remember what you don't understand. You will forget what you don't understand. And the question is, well, what are you supposed to remember about the Holocaust? It was a historical event, that 6 million people died. That's not what's to remember. What's to remember is that's what people can do. And you're one of them. And if you don't understand that you could do that, then you don't know who you are.
One of the most impactful lessons that we can glean from Jordan Peterson is the vital role of balance in our lives. He stresses the importance of finding equilibrium between order and chaos, urging us to recognize and appreciate the worth of both things, because they do both have worth. As you ponder Peterson's wisdom, keep in mind that that's just the beginning. Striving for balance is an ongoing, lifelong endeavor. His guidance can help you navigate this complex process, so let his teaching serve as a constant reminder to embrace the challenges and successes that come your way, for they're integral for personal growth and overall fulfillment.
And you can imagine the sort of terror that people who experience paranoid schizophrenia are living in perennially, because what happens to them is precisely that. They undergo neurophysiological transformations that makes everything that they once depended on disappear, and everything comes back as relevant. And that puts them in the early stages of schizophrenia. That's extraordinarily stressful neurophysiologically. So they're overwhelmed with cortisol, and their brains deteriorate as a consequence of that. It's just too much. So, and unsurprisingly, right? Because you can hardly deal with anything, let alone with everything. Now, and often what you see, and it's rarely conceptualized this way in the training of clinical therapists, but often what you see when you are dealing with people who are in crisis isn't people who have a mental illness. In fact, in my experience, that's actually quite rare. What's far more common is that the person that you're talking to has become overwhelmed by catastrophe. So their life has fallen apart in some way that makes what they're doing actually impossible. You know, so maybe someone very close to them in their family that they were depending on has developed a very serious illness, and that's thrown their entire financial state into utter chaos. Or maybe they've developed a condition that makes it impossible for them to work. Or, you know, you can imagine the potential range of catastrophes. And they're coming to see you because they're anxious and depressed, but the reason they're anxious and depressed is because everything they have ignored has popped its head back up and is hell-bent on their destruction. And often you see people who are being attacked by 5 or 6 of these monsters at the same time. And it isn't their mental illness that stops them from being able to deal with it, although that, you know, whatever weaknesses you have are going to interfere. It's the fact that what they're facing is no damn joke, and if you were facing it, you'd feel exactly the same way. So then you're trying to come up with practical solutions to these tremendously complex problems. And that's a very, well, it's extraordinarily difficult, generally speaking. People often don't come to a therapist until they've exhausted their entire range of resources. They cannot figure out what to do. And so, you know, in a situation like that, you can administer antidepressants, and maybe that'll help the person increase their stress resistance. And it may be that because they're depressed and have been brought down, that they are in fact exaggerating the danger of some of the smaller monsters that are after them. But making the person more stress resilient doesn't give them, for example, a new job, and it certainly doesn't bring back the person they've been living with for 2 years who has a degenerating neurological disease or some form of cancer. You know, I often see people who, well, they're in a relationship, maybe they're rather isolated, older people. One of the partners is dying and their entire financial situation has become catastrophic. It's like, that's not a mental illness, man. I mean, they may have got into that situation because of one inadequacy or another, but you don't even want to push that too far, because that sort of thing can happen to anyone, and will in fact happen to most people in one form or another, at least at some point in their lives. So you want to be damn prepared for that. You want to be prepared for that, because it's bitter and harsh and anxiety provoking and painful. But if you're not ready, then it's also hell. And often you can stop things from becoming hell, even though you can't stop them from being bitter and painful and anxiety provoking and all of that. You can at least delimit the catastrophe enough so that it doesn't permanently bring you and the people around you down. And that's not so bad, right? That's a hell, or at least it's a lot better than the alternative.
In a world that can often seem daunting and overwhelming, Jordan Peterson's message of resilience and inner strength serves as a very welcome reminder of the power that resides within each of us. His work inspires us to tap into our inherent capacity for growth and transformation, acknowledging that the key to profound change lies within the mirror. It's you. As you reflect on Peterson's teachings, remember that this is just the beginning. Allow his wisdom to help you uncover and nurture your inner strength, reclaim your agency, and ultimately create a life that genuinely aligns with your values and your aspirations. Unlock that inner strength and ultimately create a life that you want, that you're happy with.
What could you do to improve yourself? Well, let's step one step backwards. The first question might be, why should you even bother improving yourself? And I think the answer to that is something like, so you don't suffer any more stupidly than you have to. And maybe so others don't have to either. It's something like that. You know, like there's a real injunction at the bottom of it. It's not some casual self-help doctrine. It's that if you don't organize yourself properly, you'll pay for it, and in a big way, and so will the people around you. Now, and you could say, well, I don't care about that, but that's actually not true. You actually do care about that, because if you're in pain, you will care about it. And so you do care about it, even if it's just that negative way, you know. It's very rare that you can find someone who's in excruciating pain who would ever say, well, it would be no better if I was out of this. It's sort of pain is one of those things that brings the idea that it would be better if it didn't exist along with it. It's incontrovertible. So you get your act together so that there isn't any more stupid pain around you than necessary. Well, so then the question might be, well, how would you go about getting your act together? And the answer to that, and this is a phenomenological idea too, it's something like, look around for something that bothers you and see if you can fix it. Let's say you go into you can do this in a room. It's quite fun to do it just when you're sitting in a room, like a room, maybe your bedroom. You can sit there and just sort of meditate on it and think, okay, if I wanted to spend 10 minutes making this room better, what would I have to do? And you have to ask yourself that, right? It's not a command, it's like a genuine question. And things will pop out in the room that you know, like there's a stack of papers over there that's kind of bugging you, and you know that maybe little order there would be a good thing. And you know, there's some rubbish behind your computer monitor that you haven't attended to for like 6 months, and the room would be slightly better if it was a little less dusty and the cables weren't all tangled up the same way. And like, if you allow yourself just to consider the expanse in which you exist at that moment, there'll be all sorts of things that'll pop out in it that you could just fix.